Hi, I'm Donna from the Masquerade, and we're going to bind this little placemat here, and I'm going to do it by machine. I've always shown you how to do a binding that's turned over and hand stitched, but now I'm going to show you how to turn it over and machine stitch it, and this is how we do it. So I am going to start not on the front of my placemat, but on the back of my placemat, and I'm going to choose the middle of one of my long sides. So I'm going to get that under my foot. I'm going to take my binding. This was made at 2 1/4 inches and on the bias, and then it was folded and it was pressed so the wrong sides are together. I like to leave a tail, so I'm just going to take a wide hand as my tail, and I'm going to start 3/4 of the way down one of the long sides, and I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot, and I'm just going to attach it all the way around the quilt. Actually, it's just a placemat. So I just want to make sure my raw edges are matching the raw edge of the placemat. I'm going to back tack because this is going to get a little pulling as I go to reattach it to itself. And you got to make sure when you're going around the corner that you don't stretch. This is a bias binding and it will stretch very easily. So I'm just going to ease it around that corner gently and actually try to add a little bit of bulk in there. I'm going to try to push it towards my foot a little bit. But I don't want any puckers or folds. But I definitely don't want to pull on it. I don't want it to stretch. It looks like there might, there we go. So I'm just going to go all the way around this, and then I'm going to show you how to reattach it when I get back to the other side. So here we are rounding the last corner, and again, I'm not stretching it. I'm kind of like pushing fabric in towards my foot. I want it to have as much as it can to be able to lay over without curling the placemat up. And once I get around this corner, and I'm on a straightaway, I'm going to back tack and I'm going to pull it off my machine so I can show you how to reattach it. So here we are at the end, and we're going to reattach the binding to itself, and you can see that I didn't stitch. It's quite a ways. It's a wide hand width. And I've got the end of my binding cut, and now I need to cut this extra long piece, and I'm going to cut it so that it overlaps by exactly the width of the binding. So you can take the end of your binding and you can open it up, and you can place it on there, and I'm going to make sure this is all laying flat. And now I know that that's the width of my binding, and it would be overlapping by that much, so that's where I'm going to cut it. So I'm just going to slip my scissors in there and cut it right along that spot. The rest of this is all extra. So now to make it another diagonal seam like all the other ones were, I'm going to take that first one and I'm going to open it, and I'm going to lay it with the right side up, just like when I was sewing my diagonal seams to put my binding together. It's laying, for me, horizontally with the right side up. Now this one I've got to open it, and I want to lay it so the right side is down so that the right side's together. And I want it to do exactly what it did when I was doing my other diagonal seams, and I want to make it go from the machine towards me. So you can see why it's good to leave a big space that's not sewn so you can manipulate these two together. It's harder on a placemat than it is on a quilt. So once I've got the two of them together and they're matched up perfectly, I'm going to sew from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. So I'm going to put a pin in there. Okay, so I'm going to just pin it on that diagonal to hold it in place. It wants to twist because I don't have a huge space to work in. But I can squeeze my placemat together and make it lay flat. And once I do this diagonal seam, you're going to see that the binding is going to just fit perfectly. So if I get a couple stitches in there first, back tack, it'll hold it better for me when I go to lay it down flat. So now I'm aiming for this corner here. So I'm going to pull the pin as I go. And when I open it up and I fold it back on itself and I open up my placemat, it's exactly the size it needs to be. So I'm going to trim off this extra giant dog ears. And I'm going to open it up and press that seam open. I'm just going to finger press it. Fingernail press it. I like to use my fingernail. It gives a crisper. And then a little press along the fold. So now I can put it back in my machine and I can finish sewing the binding on. Okay, so now comes the magic, turning it back over and sewing it to the front. So you're going to want a thread that matches your binding. So I'm going to put a green thread on this. Right now I've got a gray. It's not too hideous, I suppose. It actually isn't a bad match. I think I'm going to just leave the gray on there. Now you're going to turn the binding towards the front all the way around. And when you roll it to the front, I'm going to bring you closer here. So when you're looking at the front, you can see the stitch line when I put the binding on. I used a gray thread. And so when I roll this towards the front, I want my fold of my binding to just cover that stitch line. And then I'm going to sew along that fold like 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fold all the way around. And if I do that, I know that it's going to catch on the back as well. Okay, so I have it back on my machine. I folded all my binding over, and I'm going to use this clear foot. It has 1/8 of an inch toe on the left side, and I'm just going to follow that side of the toe along the fold on this. I'm going to back tack just a little bit, and I'm just going to go all the way around like this. I think I'm going to bring my stitch length a little bit longer. It doesn't have to be so short. I'm not paper piecing anymore, so. And I'm folding it past that line because I want the stitches on the back to be on the base of the placemat and not on the binding at all. And it's good when you stop to make sure your needle's in so you don't skew it sideways when you start up again. And as long as you keep it uniform, it doesn't really matter how far away from the fold you are, as long as it's the same amount all the way around. So you find when you get to the corner, if you didn't stretch that binding, it's not going to roll and curl up. It's going to lay nice and flat. You're just going to take your time getting around the corner. And when you've got to adjust, you make sure that you have your needle in. You can use tweezers, you can use the purple thing to hold down anything that looks like it might become a fold. This is a great option for people that have a hard time doing hand stitching for whatever reasons. There's nothing wrong with the machine stitched on binding. And here we get to the corner again, so I'm going to kind of coax it in so that there's no folds. You don't need any special machine, you don't need any walking feet. This is an antique. It does nothing but a straight stitch. Nothing fancy here. Okay, here I am at the very end, and all I'm going to do is get back to where I started and do a little bit of backpacking. And that's it. And if you did a job that was pretty uniform all the way around, people aren't going to even eyeball it. No one's going to look at it. And that's done. Much quicker than hand stitching. So there's my tip for the day.